That good? All right. So since it's probably about half is, I don't know, any idea how many people are coming, why don't we just kind of form a circle over here? You guys can bring those chairs in here. So we'll just have a kind of horseshoe on this side of the room. Thank you. There you go, perfect.
While you're getting set, I just want to let you know that PAWSAP and Family are approved Act 48 and social work credit providers. In order for you to receive credit, however, you have to be present for the entire session. And then at the end of the session, I'll meet you at the door and I'll scan your badges, which will register your attendance here. And then your session and confidence surveys conference surveys are available electronically. So visit the PAWSAP or the Family website at the conclusion. And you can complete that survey. You have to complete the survey in order to get your credits, and you have 5 days in which to do that after the session is over. Our speaker today is Lee Rush. Welcome. And he is the executive director of Just Community Incorporated, which is a nonprofit organization based in Quakertown, Pennsylvania. It provides training and consultation services to communities, schools, and organizations in the areas of youth development, community mobilization strategies, student assistance programs, and restorative practices. He's also a licensed and certified trainer for the International Institute for Restorative Practices, and which is the world's first graduate school dedicated solely to restorative practices. Through his work, he has trained over 30,000 people here and internationally. So we're very excited to have him and talking to him a little bit about what he's going to be doing. I think it's going to be exciting and kind of a little piggyback off of what we learned last night in our keynote about how we can maybe start to change the culture here.
Okay.
We're excited.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. This is going to be really fun for me because I've been used to bigger groups over the last several years and months. So I love having a smaller group. And when you come in and you kind of see a circle, it can be sometimes like, oh no, I think I'll go back out. I don't want to really be so involved. I just rather we kind of hang back. But this is really, in a way, the reason that we have this in a circle is this is how things change. One of the first things that change is the physical structure of a classroom. Yes? How many teachers in here? Raise your hand if you're a teacher. You know, so am I. I'm a regular old teacher. That's what I am. People say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a teacher. Now, if I really feel like talking with them when they ask me the next question, which is invariably what? What do you teach, right? That's the real crossroads for me if I want to get into a conversation, if I'm on an airplane or somewhere, whatever. Because if I would just say, I teach restorative practices, they'll look at me kind of like not sure what to say because it's not a very common phrase. I mean, how many of you know the phrase restorative practices? Oh, about half of you. Cool. So you're reading the literature, you're reading what's going on out there in the world of school, climate and culture, behavior. So restorative practices has been around for a long time. Some people who are not in the field of education, they're not sure what that means, so they sometimes, like if you look up the word restorative, what are you going to find on the internet probably? Restorative will bring what up, you think?
Like house restorations maybe?
I'm sorry, say it louder.
I don't know, like house for
Like remodeling maybe, or a dentist, like a restorative, like maybe dentistry. But you may come up, if you put restorative practices, you probably would get something in education, but just the word restorative. It doesn't really exactly tell you what we're doing. But it really is based on the idea that the way that we change this room is first the structure of the room, okay? So this is really what we're about. So that if you came for this reason, then you can stay. If you don't want to change the world, this is your time that you get off the airplane. When the person on the plane says, this plane is about ready to leave for Philadelphia, PA, or San Francisco, make sure you're on the right plane. So I always tell people right at the start, if you want to change the world, please stay, because we need every possible hand on deck. Do we not? Yeah, did you come to change the world? Yes? Not sure? What's the world? What is the... Well, in my estimation, this is the world. This is all we got for at least the next 8 minutes. That's one of the first things I remember. A teacher told me that when I was in junior high school. We used to call it junior high back then. We didn't have middle schools. He said, 8 minutes, boys and girls, is all we got. So he immediately captured my attention. Does anybody know what that means when somebody would say all we got for sure is 8 minutes, and why we only have 8 minutes for sure? No science teachers in here? I'll give you a hint. Astronomy teachers? Somebody knows. I know somebody knows. What is 8 minutes away? If I was traveling at the speed of light, what is 8 minutes away? Thank you. All right, this is call and response. When I actually ask the question, this is what, yeah, exactly. How many knew it was the sun? Come on, somebody knew that. You said that, right? It's the sun, exactly. You never heard that?
I got nothing.
Well, there's the first piece you're going to learn today. There you go. Okay. So the sun is 93 million miles away. And if you were traveling at the speed of light, come on, join us, please. If you want to stay back there, you can. But this is...
Shall I do a handspring though?
You can do whatever you want, yeah. No cheap.
I was never able to do one of those in the first place, so that's
Yeah. 93 million miles away is the sun. And light travels how fast? I know you didn't expect science when you came to this.
8 times 10 to the 2.8. Oh.
Fast enough to get there in 8 minutes.
Exactly, 186,000 miles per second. So I'm an 8th grader, I'm listening to this, it just blows my mind, because I was brought up in the 50s and 60s, so back then, most, especially American boys, because women, girls weren't really able to fly in a rocket ship then, they weren't looking for women astronauts till Sally Ride came along, but I was immediately captured by this teacher, and he said, all we got is 8 minutes, so if that sun blows up, we wouldn't know for 8 minutes, because it takes that long for the light to reach our faces and reflect off these walls. So when I say about the world, in a way I'm being somewhat kind of silly, but we only have this room at least for the next 2 hours. This is our world. This is how we're going to hopefully interact in a way that we can change this world we're in. So the first thing we change in the world is the physical structure. And those of you who had training, of course, in circles know that teaching in a circle, while it's been around for beginning of time, circle teachings, how Socrates and Plato, where they taught outside, they taught in nature and sitting around in a circle. Obviously the Colosseum and other places that you go and see different kinds of things, where they were more barbaric, but the Senate, the United Nations was built in a circle, right? In some ways of the rooms, when you go in, you see the folks that have the stronger votes are sitting actually in a fishbowl. So they're actually in a fishbowl, and then the rest of the world representatives are around. We're going to invite you all the way up because we're going to have a big circle here, hopefully. So I invite you into this experience to learn a couple things, because what I'm going to teach you is coming right from this wonderful book. Picked this up about a decade ago. Has anybody ever heard of this gentleman who wrote this book? His name is Peter Block. Usually most people in education have not heard of Peter. Now he's almost 80 years old, lives in Cincinnati, one of my most prized and precious teachers right now. I'm going out to see him Saturday. He still does day-long intensives. He's mostly known in the world of business. He wrote one of the most popular books in the world on consulting called Flawless Consulting. It sold about 2 million copies back in the 80s. And he came out of Yale. He was trained as an engineer, worked for Exxon for a while, and he was in the development of human development, human resources, and working with teams back when they were trying to change all their methodology about how to get more people engaged as employees. So it wasn't just so top down that they would get more people off the floor to be involved in design of materials and have feedback loops. He was really a giant and a guru in the field of organizational development. So anybody who's interested in organizational change, I can't stress enough that he is basically one of the most popular authors, and he's still out there. Like I said, he's almost 80. He wrote that book about 10 years ago called Community: The Structure of Belonging. When I read it, I said to my wife, I said, well, he wrote my book. I mean, everything I've ever wanted to probably say or talk or write, I mean, I was reading every page, and it's like one of those books that you go back and read the paragraph over again. It's like, oh my God, that sentence is just like perfect. It's so elegant. It's like perfect sentence. And then my wife said, well, he sat his ass down and wrote it. You just talk a lot. He disciplined himself. He sat and stared at that screen and he wrote it. And it's a beautiful book. I really stress if you're interested in this work, if you kind of leave here in a couple hours and go, wow, that was interesting, I could definitely apply that in my work. The book has everything in it that I'm talking about. The prompts, the sentences, the courageous, what we call conversations that matter. There's 6 of them. So that's what you're going to get here a little bit, a little exposure. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then we're actually going to do it. We're going to put ourselves in small groups. That's the smallest unit of transformation is 3 people. So we'll be in what's called a triad. And yeah, we'll have some fun. We'll get to know each other in a wholly different way than if I just sit and talk to you. I have some slides. I'll show you some slides. And interestingly enough, how many people have never heard Tim speak before? The guy who just spoke. Raise your hand high so I can say, okay, the majority of us. I think I met somebody that did hear him in another conference. I had never heard him speak before. Didn't know his background. And it was, I was on every word. I was really into his story, because it was also similar to my background. So when you go to rooms enough times, usually you start to hear, okay, well, I'm sure some of you could probably relate to different aspects, if not much of that story. It's how some people come to this field. Most people who are in education, counseling, therapists, nurses, ministers, we oftentimes, and I make an I statement, I come from that background of, certainly having done some work in my own life, but also then kind of finding myself in a place that I know that stories and parables, when they're appropriately told in the right place with appropriate boundaries, can be a powerful piece of medicine for kids. And it happened to me too, and I'll share a little bit about that part of my biography. So this is somewhat experiential with that work, somewhat biographical with some of my story, and I'll talk to you a little bit about restorative practices. I work as a independent. I was a teacher for many years in a small alternative school. I live near Philadelphia. Anybody from the east? Bucks County, Montgomery County, Bucks County? Allentown? Okay.
I grew up in Quakertown. So.
You did? Oh my, you're our arch rivals, right? I'm Ram, you're Panther, right?
Well, actually, I went to Palisades. Like I was.
Okay. All right.
Line there.
Cool. Well, Palisades School District, one of the smallest in the state, we have about 500 school districts. Palisades is actually the first school district that when I say we, and now I mean the International Institute for Restorative Practices, actually came and started to pilot some of these practices. You may know that some of the first films that the IRP created were done in Palisades High School. And yeah, the superintendent out there, Dr. Barnes, he was very open. Ted Wachtel, the founder of the Institute. So if anybody's interested in my work with the Institute and what the International Institute is doing around the world, I'll put these up here. I didn't bring one for everybody, but there's enough for probably those that really want to pursue it. So I work for them as what's called an independent trainer, independent contractor, but my full-time job is director of a small nonprofit that I founded after a career in education, corporate world, HR. So I'll get some of that woven in, but let's just get at this right now. So let me start with some questions. So anybody born here besides me before 1964? Be proud of it. Okay, we're baby boomers. Just 3 of us. Oh, we're aging out soon. Okay, but this is good.
I'm going backwards. I don't know about you.
What do you mean? You're aging in?
I'm you start going backwards. I don't have birthdays I reverse, right?
Okay, I thought, well, in a way, there is a phrase in some of the literature. One of the best speeches I heard many years ago was about at some point in life, one begins to live their life backwards. Now what that means is that the older that I become, sometimes the more clear things that happened in the past become me. It just happens, oh, that's what that was about. So when I spent a year in just great angst and the existential crisis at age 45, like I was in the corporate world, our daughter came along, my wife was almost 40, I was 39, we waited a long time. We were both teachers, we didn't really think about parenting early on. We were having either too much fun, like what Tim referred to this morning about sleeping, or not, having the stress of parenting. But yeah, living life backwards is interesting. Not only telling your birthday lies, telling everybody how not you're old, but I'm proud of my age. See, I'm really kind of proud that, I am a baby boomer, because we represent a lot in our country's history. But if you were born before 64, you will remember, of course, this year differently than if you were only reading about it in history. So as I put this talk together a few months ago, and I'm very much I'm an addict. I'm an addict with especially news right now. So I consume inordinate amount of news, and I probably am consuming some fake news and false news because I'm realizing that, I got to even be more discerning and more cautious about what I read and take in and really do. And I love history, so I was a social studies teacher, so I really am fascinated about how one consumes information in our culture, because now there's so much of it, and you got to be really, careful about where you're getting your news, or you walk around with, things that are not true. They're just, it is fake. It's we learned that now with what happened with our election. So if you remember this day, you may be able to recall exactly what was happening that night. Does anybody, even through history or reading, certainly what happened in 1968. So that's what I was thinking about, as we're going through this current time with our country's history and what's happening with our polarization across the culture and politics and all that. This was the most intense year of my upbringing, 1968. So what was happening? Let's just kind of go back. What was happening in 68? Vietnam, Tet Offensive happened in January, yes. What else was going on in 68?
The march. Wasn't like Martin Luther King?
The march. He was on many marches in 68, yes, but I don't know which one you're referring to. Which one? The Selma Bridge?
Yeah.
The one in Washington? All right, Selma was in 65, but it was he was killed in 68. Martin Luther King was murdered on April 4th, I believe, or maybe the 5th, in Memphis, Tennessee, I believe. He was murdered by a white man, James Earl Ray. That happened in April. What happened in June of 68?
The church. Was it the church?
The bombing of the 4 girls? I don't believe so. It was Robert F. Kennedy who got murdered about 60 days later, John Kennedy's younger brother. So we have King gone. And if you ever get a chance, go on the internet and watch what Robert Kennedy did when he got off the plane in Indianapolis, because he knew that this was going to be a pretty intense time, and it eventually turned into quite a time with tremendous amount of unrest and riots, if you want to call them that, burnings, because it was like Martin Luther was gone. And there was such progress being made in terms of civil rights after the Voting Rights Act got passed. I know you didn't expect to get science and history here, but I'm just getting some context. This is called setting the context for this 2 hours together. So then what happened was the summer of 68, okay? What happened in Chicago? We have an election coming up in November. Lyndon Johnson decided he was not going to run for re-election. It was rather unique in American politics because he was the incumbent. The war was at its peak. They were still lying to us, by the way. We got all lied to about Vietnam, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let's get that. That's a historical fact at this point. Read the Pentagon Papers, go see the Post. The people in those positions knew that this was not winnable, the strategies we were using. Anyway, I don't want to get off on that. The Chicago Convention happened with the Democrats. And suddenly, before our very eyes on television, what we perceived was happening across the globe was happening right in our living rooms. And young people were getting slaughtered, not by guns, but by billy clubs. And Mayor Daley, these are all historical facts. You can go and look back at what happened. And it was a pretty crazy effing year. And I was only 14 years old. So the reason I'm starting with this is to put some context to that year, and having lived life backwards a little bit, to kind of look behind me and say, okay, well, geez, that was pretty intense. That was really intense. This is an intense time. People have written now that this is one of the most, I don't know what word to use. All the words have been written about and used, but it's pretty important time we're in right now as citizens, I think, as American citizens and as people who may not be citizens but love America. My daughter just got married to a Frenchman, so I'm the father-in-law of a young man who is going to eventually apply for citizenship here. He said that from the time he was a little boy, he just always wanted to come to America. He did years ago, working here. And when they met, I thought, oh, don't take her back home to your home. But then I said to him, what is your plans? He goes, oh, I want to stay here. So this is still an amazing place on the planet. I still have tremendous hope, though it's very intense time. So anyway, back here, December 24th, Christmas Eve. What was happening? No one knows? Okay, again. Oh, thank you. Tell us what happened. Thank you.
I don't know, I Googled it. I lied.
Okay. Oh, that's the first time that happened. Well, this is exactly what you all deal with now. You're teaching in the digital world, right? Yeah, exactly. This is no.
Using your resources.
Totally right. That is so cool. See, I don't teach anymore. Well, tell us what happened. Go ahead. Tell us what happened.
Let me read this.
Yes.
The crew of Apollo 8 delivered a live televised Christmas Eve broadcast after becoming the first humans to orbit another space body.
And what was that body?
Mars.
Oh, come on. We didn't get to Mars yet. That's so funny. No, we didn't get to Mars yet. We want to go to Mars. I want to go to Mars. Where? The moon. For the first time in human history, for the first time in the history of all humankind, people got out of this atmosphere, they escaped the Earth's velocity, the gravitational pull, and they flew to the moon. They didn't have that in their strategic plan. Apollo 8 was not supposed to go to the moon. But the powers that be at NASA thought, you know what? This is exactly what we're doing. Not only politically, because they were also going to fight for some of their existence after, the moonshot was a big gamble. We know that. Anyway, they flew to the moon. And it was just a trial, kind of a test, kicking the tires on the Apollo spacecraft, see if this thing could get back there. And they flew around the moon, and there I was at 14 years old, lying on my mother and father's bed. Everybody's down in the living room. I had like a bunch of siblings, and they're all talking. I got crazy, like, God, you can't talk. And I was like so into it. I left the living room, went up and had to get my own private TV in black and white, and listened to these three men in the capsule, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, who actually was the guy in Apollo 13, who, that's a new movie too, and then I forget the guy's name, I think it was Anders or Collins, I'm not sure, Anders I think. And what they did is they took along the Bible. Now I'm not talking about this in any religious way, but let's say what it is, because it was a really amazing thing, whether you're not religious or religious, a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, whatever. It was a unifying night, because what they did is they read just the first couple of passages from Genesis about the heaven and the earth. And in the beginning there was light, and then there was dark. And they gave this amazing talk, and billions of us were all experiencing it at the same moment. And it was the first time that anyone in our whole history as a species was that far away from our mother planet. And I was forever changed. Not only did I want to become an astronaut, but a little bit of reflecting on what Tim's story was, I didn't want to be anywhere in this place, living through what was going on with, my hero. I was only a kid, but still Martin Luther King. And, I was scared about Vietnam. All my cousins were being drafted. My cousins were going to Vietnam. Many people were, one of our local, heroes in our high school came back in a box, and they started putting memorials up. I was scared shitless. I was a kid, and man, I didn't want to, and I couldn't figure out what are we doing over there. I knew enough history. We were fighting the Germans. I would have gone that one probably, or whatever. I thought I was really scared. But I remember that night, and I was filled with hope and filled with some amazing passion for what this life could possibly be. Because what happened that night too, as that picture got transmitted back to Earth, they didn't do it that night because they weren't having the technology they do today. This picture it is still world famous. It's an iconic picture. It's the first picture of what? What do you call this? Earthrise. This is the first picture made by a human of our planet rising over the horizon of the moon. And years later, I went to see an Apollo astronaut. I was so into it. I studied everything I could about the space program. I was actually, in my junior high school year, I was so into this. My teachers asked me to go around to all the schools and talk on the U.S. space program. They said they don't know anybody who knew more about the U.S. space program than me. I was building rockets. We had a model club. I was totally into it. And I went to see an Apollo astronaut because I wanted to meet one of these. These were heroes to me. And this fellow named James Irwin, this picture here is another. This is the most downloaded picture in the history of the internet, so I'm told. You can look that up. I don't know if that's completely accurate. You can fact check that if you can fact check me all the want. But this picture was taken on Apollo 17 as they came back to Earth. Eugene Cernan took this one of Africa, the cradle of civilization. And all the people that have been out there said it's just an amazing experience because it's just black. They don't see stars the same way we do. And to see this and to then hear James Irwin, who was on the moon, he was the fellow who picked up what's called the Genesis rock, one of the white rock. It was one of the oldest rocks ever found by a human up on the moon, billions of years old. He said to everybody in the audience, and I'll do it with you too, so put your fingers up in front of you. Put your index finger on the top, North Pole, or the top, and you put your thumb on the bottom of that globe. Okay, can you do that? Okay, so you got the whole world in your hands, or the actual Earth between your fingers. Everybody got it? Okay? So what he said is, he goes, here, imagine that. And as he was speaking to us in a big ballroom, he said, that's my life. That's my experience. Now let me tell you what that did to my head. Mr. Irwin said to us, or commander, I think he was a commander in the U.S. Air Force. No lines, no boundaries, no countries. And that was all that was in the universe that was alive, because everywhere else was just black and nothing. And many astronauts say that they're spiritually, profoundly, deeply moved. And these are a lot of times test pilots and scientists and people that may not be into that kind of a conversation sometime. And he came back and he said he was going to devote much of his work to just kind of peace and unification of the human being across the planet. So for me, why I bring this up in our beginning is because there's different parts of our journey, or maybe you can relate to this, your own journey, mine, that I kind of have touchstones that I know that for me personally, and everyone has their own personal journey they're on, but there's certain points I realized that's what that was for me. Because that night, I didn't have the same kind of experience as Tim, not nearly, his ACE score would be pretty high, right? You all know about ACEs? Yeah, you can count those up. So you know that he was even more susceptible to harm and trauma and whatnot from that upbringing. I think my ACE score is about 2, but that's enough. 2 is enough. It's enough. That gives me a little bit of risk, certainly the risk factor. So these points are where I got hope along the way are important, and it's why I kind of start my talks, because what we're going to do is talk about crossroads today. One of the conversations that Peter Block talks about is called possibility. And it's called the possibility conversation is extremely critical for people no matter what age they are, because we're always at a crossroads at some point, even if it's a tiny crossroads, literally, like when you're going to go that way to go home for somebody different, or this way, or if you're going to, last night my crossroads, I want to get 1 piece of cake or 2 pieces of cake. I could live with one. They're so colorful. They really are just begging to be eaten, all these different colors. So I went 2 colors. But there's crossroads all the time. And this is another crossroads. So what happened on this date? You know this one, if you're all in education. Yes?
No, that's Columbine. I was in the hospital having my 3rd child when I was in labor the 20th and had him the 21st, and will forever remember.
You will always remember that date. Yeah, the teacher went into space on January 28th, 86.
Okay,
And then,
that was...
yeah, and that was terrible. That was an unbelievable tragedy too, because that was also preventable. And in a way, we didn't get lied to the same way, but the night before that liftoff, there was a 40-person, I don't think we were about 25 in here, 40 people were on a conference call from Morton Thiokol, the company that built the solid rocket boosters, and they basically told NASA, do not do this. These specs tell us that those O-rings will not be secure. They will fail, probably. And NASA did it anyway. They killed 7 Americans. One of them was Krista McAuliffe, of course. So this whole notion of, that's really part of what this work is about too, is changing the systems. Because what they actually found out from that, just a little digression here, but what they found out from that tragedy is the systemic system within NASA was so flawed. Yeah, the O-ring, they fixed that in a matter of weeks. That's mechanical, they fixed it. it was the decision-making chain that they knew that was basically lethal, that people were overriding engineers. That's what their whole life is. They're experts. You don't override an engineer that tells you that thing's not going to hold, gas. So getting back to this date here, this was Columbine. All know where you were? April 20th, the morning you heard? All right. You were in 8th grade, yes. All right. Some people were really, even younger than that. So, yeah, that was pretty depressing. That was pretty scary, and still is to some degree, because we don't have to look more than probably 10 days in our past to see it continuing. So why I put this slide up here is because this is another crossroads for me and how I even got to be in front of you today. When we first heard of this tragedy, the news, again, because they oftentimes rush to be first, don't fact check. This is why every time you see news right now, say, well, maybe, maybe not. Because they're all out there competing for eyeballs, and they all want to be first. They all want to get the scoop. So anytime you see anything about anything, put a pause button on and say, maybe, maybe not. Let's just slow down and see what really is going on, because 25 students reported dead. No, it wasn't 25, it was 13. And there was actually 12 students, I think, one adult teacher, and then 2 of the shooters. I was not in America. At this point, where I was over here, and another touchstone. So I'm sorry, I'm in your way. Just say move over. I was over across the world, because at that point, another crossroads, right? I was 45 years old. Our daughter was about 6 years old, and my wife wanted to stay home. Of course, it was the best decision for her and for our family. She was also a teacher. We didn't wait in almost 40 years, or well, we didn't wait 40 years, 20. We were married 20 by that point. She didn't want to, we tried the daycare thing, and it just wasn't working for us, and we had to make some moves, and I figured, well, I'll just find a way to make up your income. We were both 50-50 earners. She was making half our income, I was making half. I was going out of my mind, like, how am I going to double my income? I go, oh, wow, I just kind of look around. I ended up going into the corporate world and becoming a director of human resources. My boss was such a smooth talker. He goes, well, you're good with people, human resources, good with that, good with it. Well, I didn't realize I had to deal with payroll, human resource benefits, discrimination, lawsuits, everything that you probably don't want. You're not human resource people, right? At least administrators. It was killing me. I gained all this weight. And my good friend said, listen, take a break, because you don't seem you're very happy. I said, I'm not. I said, I didn't tell my boss yet this, but I hate my job. How am I going to tell my boss I hate my job? He said, well, you're not. Just take some vacation. How much time do you have? I go, I got 6, 7 weeks if I need to. He goes, well, we're not going to go that long. We're just going to go for a month. But my good friend would take trips to Bhutan every so often, and he would have about 12 or 15 people. And if you've never been there, it is an amazing place. It is what's called the last Shangri-La on the earth. Because when you go into this country, it's as if you walk back in time. It's as really if you walked back into a time tunnel.
I have a student from there.
You do?
I have a student from Bhutan. Yeah.
Well, then you could probably talk a little bit about what a beautiful...
No, it's really interesting, the stuff that he says, but they didn't get the TV or internet. They didn't get, TV to 99?
I was on the last trip with any Westerners before they went in to get a state TV. They have one internet service. In 1999, we were there. That was the first year they got the internet and the television. So the reason I'm showing this picture is because this is where I was when Columbine happened. And what happened during this day, it's an unbelievable country. It's all mostly Buddhist, been around, of course, for the beginning of, I don't know, thousands of years. It sits right between China and India, up near the Tibetan Plateau. And you can't go in as an individual. You had to go in with a group. So there was a tariff on all the incoming tourists, because they didn't want it to be like Nepal and other countries where it just kind of gets trashed with literally trash litter, and everybody's kind of trekking around. And so they're trying to go what's called the middle path. They know they have to go into the 21st century. They knew that. But they want to preserve as much as their natural heritage as they can. They still have traditional dress. They have many languages in the country. I have never been around happier human beings in my entire life. In fact, when we came home and the plane took off to come back to the U.S., I noticed as I looked out the window, tears are rolling down my cheek. And I knew in that moment that I may or may not ever get back. I haven't been back since. I'd love to go back someday. But I was grieving just leaving, that it was another place that gave me great hope. Because during this trip, as this little village, and here's the schools, so this is a junior, senior high school. The Sherpas had set up all our tents. They shut down the entire village. They said, we have these guests coming from the West, the Americans, and some of these people have never seen an American. They never saw white people. They never saw people like this tall. So I was a giant in that country at 6'2". And all the kids came out of school. They created a little processional aisle for us, and they had a greeting. They all wear their traditional dress, the men and women. They shut down the shops. The parents came down from all their jobs, and the farmers came down, and the temple shut down, and the Lama came. Not the Dalai Lama, but the Lama. So he was there with us. I teach juggling. I used to teach juggling when I was a teacher. And the reason I'm holding this scarf is I travel with this. I've been to 80 cities in the last 2 years doing this restorative practices work. I want to share a little bit about what I think is so promising with restorative practices. But in that country, if you're given a scarf like this, it's a very sacred gift because this scarf is made out of beautiful silk. It symbolizes, as it was put around each of our necks, all of our guests, this Lama put it around our neck. And he said, may you have a smooth journey through life. And welcome to our country. And I started again I'm very emotional. I come up pretty strong on emotional Myers-Briggs and all that. Well, we were all emotional. We were all very, very emotional that day because we didn't know what the hell was going on back in our country. I mean, we thought we heard 50 people were murdered in a high school, not 15. There was no internet, no phones. It was a satellite phone. And I just got very, moved by this ceremony. And his nephew standing beside him asked, he said, what's wrong? And I said, we had this thing happen. We just learned about it. And I said, I don't know how this could happen. And the monk said, he didn't speak English, but he was being interpreted. He said, this could never happen here. And I said, why? Tell me why. What do you think he said? They're kind of pretty funny people, too.
There's no guns?
Exactly. No guns. He goes, that will never happen here. We have no guns. I go, yes, that is part of the problem, right? All right, so we don't want to get too deep into those woods right now. But he said, no, he goes, there's another reason. And I said, what is that? What is the reason? He said, there must be some disturbance in your minds. There must be something that is infecting your mind. There must be a disease, a dis-ease. The word dis, if you separate, there must be some dis-ease in your minds. He goes, here we're much, much more calm. And of course, all Buddhists are pretty much committed many times to daily meditation. Their religion, if you want to call it that, but their way of life is simply, they're very, very connected to the earth. And many of the people there, they live at a level of what's called subsistence. They make as much money as they need to really live. Again, they actually measure the gross national happiness in Bhutan. They don't measure necessarily gross national product. They have metrics for gross national happiness. And so he said, that cannot happen here. We are much calmer. So, and then he said something I'll never forget. It's why I think I'm still doing this at 63. You talked your way into your life. You created your life. First comes thought, because as our human mind develops, we are the most amazing creatures on the planet, the most intelligent. Our minds think, and then we can take thoughts and put it into words. We have language, and then we take words and we put it into action. You thought your way into this of reality, and you can get yourself out of it. But first comes thought. First comes slowing down, and then comes action. And then comes an idea that maybe one person says to another, and then they connect to another person. He goes, you can talk yourself out of it too. You can act your way out of it. It'll take a long time. So in a way, that gave me another piece of hope. That coming back, in a way, in that year was like when I started this nonprofit. I said, whatever I do, I'm not going back to that corporate world. And it was an amazing opportunity that I got given to my boss. My boss gave me this opportunity when I got back. I said, I really don't like this. And he goes, that's really good, okay, because when you were gone, we eliminated your job anyway. So, true story. He said, the good news is you're not fired. The bad news is your job's been eliminated. I go, what the hell does that mean? How does that work? He goes, well, we're downsizing a little bit. We don't need the corporate office of HR. He goes, we're going to give you 90 days. You've been here 13 years. So long story short, I got a lot more than 90 days. And he basically cast me off. In the corporate world, what they call it is like a golden parachute. I don't know. They cast me off with some pretty decent severance, and that's how I started this nonprofit. So it was a gift. And the idea about this workshop, when I put it together, was what questions inform my work right now? What are the questions? Because I have no answers, really. I mean, I do have one answer to this burning question. See if I can find my phone here. While we were in Bhutan, one of the things we would do is we go through these parts of the country and visit amazing temples, and yeah, it was wild. One day I'm walking through the hillside, and I said to the Sherpa, I go, man, this must have a lot of erosion, this hill. Because we were walking in a trail, and it was we were in a trail that was deep. It was up to my knees. We were walking that deep. I said, the water, where's the water go? He goes, there's no water up here. This is not erosion. I said, well, how'd this trail get so deep? You know, what do you think the answer was? It's been walked on for 3,000 years, he said. It gets worn down. I literally was up to my knees almost. That gives you an idea about the way that these humans have developed their culture and whatnot. So it was an old place, and it was amazing experience to sit around a campfire at night, and kind of each person, some people were divorced, crossroads. Some people were retirees, crossroads. Some people were empty nesters, crossroads. Some people just recovered from a life-threatening illness, cancer, crossroads. There were many people on this journey, and it was kind of like a kind of amazing group of people that we were with. And one of the nights that we were together, our leader, his name is Sam Keen. Sam is, anybody ever remember Joseph Campbell's work? Joe Campbell?
The Hero of 1,000 Faces.
Yes. Who said that? Very good. He wrote a book called Hero with 1,000 Faces, interviewed by Bill Moyers. Joe Campbell was basically saying that we all live, no matter where we're in the world, we're all in similar, he talks about a hero's journey, that each person eventually has to come to the point, like, what am I doing here? What am I going to do with this life, right? What am I going to do? I want to have a family, I want to start my business, I want to just travel, I want to write, I want to make music, I want to teach, I want to be a nurse. You know, what is it? What is the reason that people are here? And I can't download what I was going to read, so let me just look at it on the computer. So one night, as we're talking around the campfire, the leader, Sam Keen, who worked with Joe Campbell, they were like talking about mythology for many years. Plus, Joe was talking about world mythology, and Sam kind of took it as he said as a metaphor. He goes, every one of us lives a similar journey, just finding out what we're here to do, and every culture gives us clues about where we're at different parts of our development. So this reading, called The Question, is why that question mark is on the screen. So let me just find it, because I can't get it on the phone. So here's what it says. Okay, so they read this, and it reminds me of exactly what I'm asking right now. What question informs my work? Once I lost the way, Lord, there's no return until I find the truth of error and the error of knowing it all. I tell myself that all is well as I move triumphantly from one mistake to another, still certain that I know the answer. But the answers become questions. I'm confused with chaos. What is the answer? Can I forever lance the wound of fear with question upon question? Can I tell myself each day that it's not necessary to be so sure, but only to ask where, why, or how? I need an answer, Lord. I need an answer to one question. What question shall I be asking now that the world is burning? When I first heard it, it kind of struck me in a way that, wow, I don't want to. Is the world burning? Well, in some places, Syria. Do we forget about what's happening in Syria? In a way, we get compassion fatigue, don't we? I do. I'll make I statements as best I can. I do. Sometimes I pass through those stories because it hurts. It really, if you're still, even last week, if you read the story, what happened in Florida. And it kind of, for me, I can get numbed out to this anymore. But then I really let it in when I watched the kids. I don't know if you saw the video of the young man, Sam Zeif, in the White House. to me, that's really, regardless of what you may think or not think about the administration, the fact that that still can even take place on national television, and I understand politics and I know staging and I know all about that stuff, but still, there was a young man, 17, 18 years old, speaking so deep from his heart. He basically, and if that doesn't move you to some degree, it's just an indication of maybe a little fatigue, because that to me was one of the most powerful things I've seen in the last many weeks. You know who I'm talking about? If you haven't seen it, it's up on the internet, Sam Zeif. He basically was saying, like, how is this possible that, in a way what the monk said to me 20 years ago in Bhutan, like, well, how do we create that world? That's possible, that I could go in and get that kind of weapon of war. And, his brother was upstairs right above him as the shots were ringing out. So yeah, it's burning in Florida today. People are burning. So what burning question gets asked at a time like this in life? Like, what can I do? Really, it comes down. Well, many of you just heard again being reminded. Tim did a great job reminding us the power and the amazing gift that we have in this station of life, of what we're doing with young people or other people we work with. So I came back home real quick, finish up this part of the story, to Bucks County, formed Just Community to do this work as a nonprofit. Mostly I train teachers, mostly I go around in different workshops and trainings. We're doing a lot of work with the Institute to 2-year projects. I love the big projects that we get to be with cities and big districts for 2 years, to be on site in their classrooms. We work with teachers, we give them feedback, talk with them about circle facilitation, talk about policy change. It's really exciting because it's not just one-off trainings. I know how many times have you been in a one-off training? It's like, well, I'm going to go back and, boy, I wish other people would have been here. I wish my school board would have been with me. I wish my principal would have been with me. So this is an opportunity we're getting to work with whole systems. I love this quote from Eliot. All my exploration, I still love this because I always wonder, okay, I'm back home, or I'm back in a circle, or I'm back with where I know this differently than I did 20, 30, 40 years. And each time that's what to me age is about. The wisdom and what little wisdom I think I might have, just the experience of I have taken more breaths than many people, and I might know a thing or two that only came through a lot of pain and heartache over decades. But I know this place. I know that it's possible, that there's not a place that'll ever be without hope. Am I optimistic in the short term? My optimism gets dashed often, right? We'll see what happens right now. So if someone says, are you optimistic? I go, no, not right now, and not in the short term, but I'm eternally hopeful. Because once hope dies, we're sunk. Well, we're sunk without hope. So keeping hope alive, whatever makes it happen, is really the key to how you keep it alive. Because this is what we came home to, locking down. And we're hearing the same rhetoric right now. Harden the target, harden the targets, get teachers guns. And maybe people have all kinds of opinions about that. But I know this from our history of what happens when people get afraid. Because once people are afraid, all kinds of things that we might not otherwise support happen because we're fearful for our children, we're fearful for things that may or may not ever happen. The studies, well, you've seen that slide that just talks about zero tolerance. We're kind of undoing some zero tolerance. TSA, you remember before 9/11 what it was like to go through an airport, kind of just breeze through? They had these people working for minimum wage. Probably a lot of the airports would hire their own independent security people. Wasn't by the government, created the Department of Homeland Security. And what percent of these, they call them in retail world, they call them mystery shoppers. They go through a Burger King and they kind of are doing a little chart of how fast they get served and how, so they have people that go through TSA all the time with guns and weapons and knives to see if they get through. Do you know what percent can get through? You remember reading this one? See how much of an addict I am. All these useless facts in my head, but 80%, when they do some of these trial runs, 80 to 85, it was 95 one run, 80% of the time they can get contraband through the TSA. And that, pardon me?
So I'm never flying again. I get my hair gel through once.
Well, you don't want to think about it because, what are you going to do? It's like, that's why when I say, well, you get a metal detector at the school or you get cops around a school, I understand. Yeah, there's probably some level of, safety that might not otherwise be there, but I guarantee you, I can get a gun in any school in America. Do you think that's an accurate statement? Yes, you're all, yeah, okay, people are nodding heads or don't want to say.
said.
I could be wrong. There might be one I can't, but I would give it it's pretty loose still. Even, I'll leave a window open. I'm a pretty conniving guy if I need to be, right? I was a kid, I was still 14. Yeah, I don't mean to scare people, but just, it's like real, just like what, I'm going home tonight. I'll be leaving here at 12:30. I'll be home enough time for our school board meeting tonight. I'll be in front of our school board, and I will make another plea for hardening, not the school, but hardening our resolve, hardening our attitudes, hardening our intelligent mind. That what we really need is more of you, more counselors, more social workers, more intervention programs, more nurses, more anybody. Absolutely. I still believe strongly in being a showing up citizen in my home district of Penridge. Penridge right down the street from Palisades. We have a pretty affluent area. We did last year, and we have one counselor in every middle school. I said, this is absurd. Well, we did have two, and then they made one into an instructional support coach. I said, no, we need at least two, if not three. Then they hired an additional counselor for 3 middle schools and split her into 3. So you have 1/3 in each of the buildings. I go, well, that's worse. The poor woman who you hired's got 3 buildings, and she's probably really, young and full of vim and vinegar, wants to do an excellent job. She's going to get totally strung out with 3 buildings. She'll get really, kind of flattened out. So that was worse. But anyway, so we swing back and forth between this part of the continuum. We're working a little bit on the criminal justice end, where we started to see. This is an amazing graph. It's a hockey stick of how many Americans are in prison or in the justice system. What caused this? Another question for you historians or loving of trends in American culture. What caused the hockey stick to go straight up with people in prison back in the 80s and 90s?
The war on drugs.
Exactly. Say more. What about it?
Nothing. I mean, I've watched those documentaries, but basically they tried to crack down on, instead of helping people who had a drug addiction, they labeled them as criminals, and so a large population of people, mostly black or Hispanic, were incarcerated. You got it.
And the same thing is happening in American schools, and that's what got restorative practices a little bit more on people's radar. The number of kids who are suspended and expelled in an American school, the rate of increase of black and brown students, English as second language speaker, IEP students, 4 to 5 times greater than white kids. There's a reason for that. There's structural, institutional problems that we have to look at, and people are unpacking that and working on it. But the same thing happened in the system here back in the 70s when they made these 3 strikes and you're outlaw. I'm sorry, you're not. They made you an outlaw. 3 strikes and you're out. Mandatory sentences. There was a tremendous issue around race because what happened is the young black boys and men in cities were smoking crack. And what were the people in Wall Street doing? Snorting cocaine, same chemical, different method to kind of create it. And they were so disproportionate that one of the things the Obama administration started to work on with Holder and others is to say this has to be fixed because it's a racist and structural, it's an institutional problem. So they fixed that to some degree. Now we have an attorney general who basically said they're going to undo all that. So that's our work too, to kind of say, listen, we're making some progress, and now we're going to go back a little bit and kind of undo what was some progress being done. Okay, so the International Institute, this is some of the work I do when I do training. So we do work in the circle. We're teaching people how to do facilitation of circles. But what I really love to do is, and by the way, that's how we define restorative practices. Some people think it's just circles. I'm going to give you all one of these cards today because this is also part of a restorative approach. You've heard of the restorative question cards. Does anybody have these already? Has anybody been through an IRP training? Some of you have been? Oh, we're about here in PA? In State College? I was out here years ago.
You were the teacher.
Was I your teacher?
Yeah.
It was like a really snowy day?
Yeah.
You remember that day?
It was
I remember.
great.
Oh, good to see you again.
Yeah.
All right.
We had to come. Yeah.
All right, so you have these cards. Are you using them?
Yes.
Say yes.
Yes.
Say yes.
Absolutely.
Say yes.
Teacher in her building.
So I'm going to pass these out to everybody, but restorative practices, the way that we view it at IRP, is we really believe it's a new emerging social science in this century. And it took 7 years for the Institute to get accredited by PDE to be a degree-granting institution. Master's degrees can be earned, certificates of practice, people get certified to be a restorative practice teacher. So that literature's up here, you can pick it up if you'd like. But it is an emerging science. It's basically blending education, psychology, sociology, anthropology, even economics. It is a very fascinating field, and it's growing in leaps and bounds across the globe, and especially in American education, because people are figuring out, we cannot keep doing the same thing in terms of discipline. What did Einstein tell us? What's the definition of insanity? Same thing. What's the second half of that? Expecting something different to happen, and yet today, I bet there's some kids being suspended somewhere. They're going to do some time. Say, when you suspend a kid, you're teaching them one thing: how to do time. How to do time. Anybody can do time. I know people have been doing, I know one gentleman, he did 25 years. Young. He was young in mind because he kept his mind very young. He went in about 18, 19 years old. He shot somebody up in Buffalo, New York, and he did serious time, 25 years. He was hopped up on drugs. His girlfriend was being sexually assaulted by somebody else who was doing drugs, and a gun was involved, and he shot in defense of his girlfriend. But he did time. He went to prison for a quarter century. He came to our restorative practices training, and because of his background as an African American, and he was a very bright man, he spent a lot of time reading. He goes, this restorative justice movement, he goes, it's the next wave, Lee. I never forgot what he said to us. We're doing circle training. We did training of trainers. He said, Lincoln did so much. Johnson and Kennedy tried to advance it so much. But, when we got off the plantation, we had no paper. We're just vagrants. We had no name. Names were taken away from us. That was just part of it. Couldn't vote. Jim Crow laws came along. Excellent book. Read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. You want to get educated about, what's happening in our country's history around race. Excellent book, The New Jim Crow, Alexander. But then this gentleman said, restorative justice is our third wave of becoming that what we always said America was, a more perfect union, a more fair, more just, more equitable. And I always say now, in this our third century, I hope I live a long time because I'm just really nosy. I really want to see how this evolves. My daughter's going to see it. In the 2040s or somewhere around 2045, white Anglos will no longer be the minority. And some people are freaked out about that. I'm excited. I really am. And I think this is the year or decade, whatever. I call it the ascendancy of the feminine. There's going to be a woman president in America in not too distant future. I hope. I think. I don't know, but it seems like it's happening, that the systems of patriarchal, they're kind of slowly breaking apart. So, and it's time. It's, the Me Too movement, all that's happening. This is all kind of the confluence of it together is an exciting time. So, let me finish up this piece, then we're going to break into small groups. How many people have seen this before? I know you have, the social discipline window. We use this as one of our philosophical touchstones about the philosophy of what restorative is. Because if that's all we're doing, just boundary setting, limit setting, structure around rules, that's one part of the equation. This is another part, having a lot of support services, being SAP or being middle school counselors or middle school teachers or administrators. We know that middle school is every year is critical. But we know that the transition years are really critical, like third grade, right? What has to happen by third grade, hopefully? Read on level, yeah, exactly. If you're behind, the risk factors immediately increase, right? Of failure, and then you start being held back in grades. If you're held back in grade, we know it's a risk factor. Middle school big, middle school to high school to college. Every transition year is huge. Well, here was, the point for me, when I'll end this with a little story about what happened to me in 9th grade. That transition, when I went from junior high to high school, was critical. And it was because of, Tim also had his mentors, and what was the guy's name? John the barber. Was it the barber he was saying, or?
La Barber.
La Barba, was that the name? Okay.
First I thought it was.
I thought he
that
said,
too.
yeah. So there was somebody in his life, there's probably somebody in your life too that probably kind of picked you up and saw you in some way that made a connection when you just needed them the most. And there was both of that happening, because if we're too high on that access with no support, we end up just punishing kids. If we're too far down the road on that axis with just a lot of love, support, encouraging, we just become enablers, become rescuers, and we don't hold people to limits that we know they can meet. And I always say in my trainings, if you're too much in that quadrant or too much in that quadrant, you're going to end up in that quadrant. I don't love the word neglectful. I say we end up exhausted. If we're just constantly, hoping that these rules hold, and we know that for Tier 1 kids, we definitely know, and I just caught myself because I said I do not want to use that language. I get infected by language too. I don't want to call a kid a Tier 1 kid. It's a really ridiculous way to speak. But I hear it, and I just caught myself. I'm going to call myself out. I'm going to tell on myself. If ever you hear somebody tell us Tier 3 kids, Tier 2, don't do it. Why not? It's labeling, it's stigmatizing, it's reinforcing a negative stereotype in a way you just create that lens and that's all you see. But my point is that most people follow the rules. Most people do the right thing most of the time. But those that don't require sometimes that and that's going to be the real trick, is do both of them in strong ways, that you become restorative. If you're only doing one or the other, you end up exhausted. And no one lives in this next quadrant all the time. I always say stress will drive you to one of the quadrants on the upper left or the lower right. If you're all parent, how many parents in here? Anybody? Teenagers? Anybody parenting teenagers? Well, this is when you really get your test, right? Of course, because that's when you realize, oh, they're totally independent. Really, they're going to say no and mean it. They're going to rebel, so it's their developmental task in life to drive you crazy. You hope you don't lose your mind. You can stay after for your own support group if you're a parent of teenagers. If you're too much in this quadrant, you're going to end up like this young lady. A principal gave this to me in one of the inner cities I was in. I forget, it's Detroit or Chicago. She has it on her wall. And she said, we're losing half our teachers. We knew this through the literature. Half of American teachers leave within 5 years. You knew that statistic? That's a major problem. That's like a loss of tremendous capital, right? A lot of the people who want to become teachers, because they're not prepared for what they walk into. They're not prepared for kids with their buds in and say, take out. No, they're not prepared for just the low-hanging fruit all the time. They got to deal with all that crap to get through the curriculum. They're not prepared for all the, this. I don't want to preach to the choir. But that's what happens. She has I quit on the board. So restorative is having both those axes in a strong way, that you can be tough and you can be loving. You can be very firm and you can be very fair. You can be decisive and you can be patient. You can do all those things. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both things. If you're in a system that applies that philosophy, that's even more, positive energy for you. But you can do your classroom this way. So, I just want to get through these to get to our small groups, because this was just a letter that helped our field. It's called a Dear Colleague letter. Came out of Washington. Again, now we're facing with the fact that some of these might get rescinded. It doesn't have much teeth in a local school, but every American superintendent, every school board got that letter in January 2014 that basically said, fix it. Fix it, because this civil right, this human right to a free and appropriate education is being violated in so many cases. You can't keep suspending kids and expelling them for this low-level stuff. So some states have passed laws and said that basically you're not going to suspend for insubordination. You will not do it K through 4. Now the problem in the teaching profession, and where the rub is now, is the suspension rates are being decreased across the country. Why? How do you decrease suspension? It's very easy. Stop suspending kids. And what's the pushback from the unions and the teachers? Is the behavior changing? Because if it's not changing, then we still got to get back to the workbench and figure this out. Because, okay, I'm with you. I don't want to suspend a kid on 3 days. It's just going to give him a lot more time to get in some trouble maybe, or she might get in some difficulty, whatever. So where are the services that we're going to do? Because I don't want to keep taking my time away from 27 kids or 28. That's the problem. And I was in the school in Milwaukee just last week, elementary, 550 kids in the building. Half the group was under 34. Half the group had been new within the last 2 years. Most of the teachers, they were just like sponges. They wanted to learn as much as they can, but there was also a look on many of their faces like, this is crazy. Really? How do you handle kids that just crawl around the floor the whole time? How do you handle kids that get sent to the office and they start kicking chairs, throwing stuff, breaking stuff, all walking around? Elementary kids, right? You all may live this if you're working at that age level or know about those stories. What's the magic? There is no magic answer, but there are answers, and it takes some time to work those through. But the idea is suspending and expelling got to stop, so that helped reduce that, but now why this training, and it will help tremendously if you do it long term. I say 3 to 5 years. You want to change a culture? Change a conversation, but put yourself on an appropriate timeline and know that true culture change, climate change in a school district, minimally 3 to 5 years. It's going to take some time. So, last point, and then we'll do a small group. Anybody here from Pittsburgh area, Western PA? Our institute got one of the largest opportunities. The federal government gave Pittsburgh $3.5 million for a 3-year project with a control group and experimental. The report comes out this spring. It'll be very heavily read in the literature because it's reported by RAND Corporation. So the independent researcher was RAND. So it wasn't us doing the own research. It wasn't evaluative. It was vigorous research with control and experimental groups, observations, focus groups. That report will come out this spring. They'll probably show some slight moves of the needle about classroom behavior. And really interesting, this was not one of their metrics, but in Canada, one of the school districts that did restorative, you know what they started measuring? Employee absenteeism on Fridays and Mondays. And how they sold it to their school board was they added up all the cost of substitutes. And they added up all the problems when the substitute was there and didn't know how to handle the class, and the time spent on behavior follow-up by teachers or curriculum not getting done. And then they found that the teachers who were in a restorative school, the metric was that their absenteeism suddenly decreased on Friday and Mondays. They were not so exhausted. They weren't in those quadrants of always up in the upper right or lower right or upper left and the bottom neglectful. And they kind of had some dollars and cents argument that restorative was improving the climate among the staff, among the adults. One person gave me a great idea recently. She said every central office administrator should, their union was trying to negotiate this, because the substitutes were a problem. They said, well, we got all these people in the central office, they're all teachers, they're all certified, put them in the classroom. Everyone should have 4 to 5 days mandatory, let them sub, and seriously, there's some wisdom in that, because then they could come in and see what you deal with every day. And it's not just like, oh, that's your problem over there, principal. It's a great idea. So, you can say you heard it here first, or maybe you didn't. Or
I'm going to hashtag that.
there you go. All right, let's do some fun work. Peter Block. So that's enough reason, if anything, of an argument about what we're doing and why it's so important. And there is some hope out there. I know you got hope, or you wouldn't be here. I'm sure you do. If you signed up for, how many people are with SAP teams? Okay. Excellent, because I didn't know, because they combined the conference, I never know, who's who. Excellent. So how many people, kind of actually really volunteered? Definitely want to do this, or got kind of voluntold? To be on the SAP team.
I love being on SAP.
All right, cool. Sometimes people get there because they're the only counselor, or the assistant principal, or teacher, they rotate it. But I say, listen, there is choice involved in every decision. So I'm around a lot of school folks. I'm around a lot of systems that are really toxic and are really tough, and I leave the room and I go, thank God they're there, because, we need every soul. But I couldn't work in that, whatever. But every choice that's made is a choice. Every person's choosing to do something, there's a cost to not do it, right? If you don't want to take that job, leaving in mid-career, trying to make 60, 70,000 somewhere, it's not the easiest thing when you're in that deep. But the idea for this first exercise is a conversation called Possibility. So here's how this works. And if you read the book, you'll find all the kind of protocols are very clearly laid out here. One woman in our training took this back to her principal. She said, you know, we stopped meeting as a faculty. She said, our faculty meetings just got so useless. People just rebelled. They just stopped coming on time. They brought work. The principal said, you know, we'll do departmental meetings. After she got exposed to this methodology, she went back to her principal and said, can I have the library next Wednesday? She goes, just volunteer. We'll send a memo around, or just whoever wants to come, I'll have some food. And like 6 people, they had like 80 people in the building. 6 people came. And she started practicing this, because that's the way you learn something. You get exposed to it, you practice the methodology. And she used the book's protocol. Same questions that we'll do here in a minute. The next week, people came back, and they had twice as many people. And eventually, people, because it was not a bitch session, there were really clear ground rules around the conversation. There was some fun, there was fun stuff, and it was just fun. Pretty soon, the principal came through, she said, he goes, what are you doing down there? Because more people are going. And she said, well, you're invited. If you'd like to come, we're going to do it again next month, or whatever, how often she was doing it. Pretty soon, about half the faculty was meeting on a volunteer basis, because they loved the connection and camaraderie, the connecting with each other, not bitching about the system that they didn't really, you don't have control over what your state legislators are going to pass. There's some things that when you sign up for a state job, it's like, I'm taking the good, the bad, the ugly. And on balance, if it still comes up, like, you know, all the costs I pay to do somebody else's bidding, or whatever, it's still worth it. I'm still in. I'm all in. But then sometimes people say, this is not what I want to do. And I always say that's a tough decision, but that's really that's the crossroads. That's the burning question for some people. What do I want to do? Because time is moving on. This work can really help, I think, get people clear with their choices. All right, so here's how this works. Everybody stand up. All right, so the way I was taught is that you must at least take these in. I never know if people really follow the suggestions or not, but to be sitting with people you do not know, okay? So how many people came with other people in the room? All right, so you want to sit with some people that you don't know. Now, why do we suggest that you sit with people that you don't know?
So you learn something new about yourself, possibly.
Yes, that's excellent. Yes, other reasons. Why do we sit with other people who we do not know?
New ideas or approaches.
We get out of group think.
New ideas, get a group think. What Peter says is you cannot be too surprised when you're sitting with people that you know, because you know them a lot, or they know you. And your conversation is going to be totally different if you're with what he considers, we don't say people who you don't know, or strangers, because in a way, you know, we know who we are in a way. We know what you kind of live. If you're a school person, you kind of know what people's lives are about. But sitting with somebody who you know less than another will give you a chance to be more curious. So when you ask questions of that person, you won't know really what they may say because you don't know them as well. So here's how this works. We're probably going to be somewhat off. I didn't count. We had 15, but now we got more. So what you're going to do is go find 2 people who you don't know as well as others. Find your 2 partners. And what's great about this room with these chairs, in his book he actually has a whole chapter on the structure of adult learning. This is what every school should have too. Big rooms, chairs with wheels, and there's a whole piece of work out there of architects. You know, architects are now studying education facilities. They're reading our literature on restorative, and some architects are designing schools with a restorative foundation where they create rooms in hallways. There's one school that I was at, and they actually have a room in every hallway that's the circle room. And the teacher, they just schedule it, and everybody gets to, you don't have to move all the desks and worry about that. So with your chairs, you're going to move in all these spaces where you're not near anybody else. So find 2 people who you don't know as well as others, take your chair, and form a little triad. All right, go.
Can you put the paradigm or the block slide back up?
Yes, I'm going to send you all these slides too.
Okay, cool.
Okay, say hello. If you know somebody, that's okay, but just try to find people you don't know as well as another. Okay, here's your prompt. So, in this book, okay, that's fine. You're good. You can hear me okay? Okay. All right. So what Peter says, There's 6 essential conversations that change your world, change your culture, change the climate. The first one we didn't talk much about because in a way, it's called an invitation. Somehow you got here. Either you looked forward to this. How many people have been to other SAP conferences, middle school? So you know what this conference is about. It's occasionally fun. You can pick up a lot of new ideas where you get to meet some people. The invitation conversations, you already accepted the invitation. You had many choices. I think there was 9 choices. You chose to be in this room for some reason, and you made it here. And hopefully what you take from this is at least a couple talking points. This is one great one he shared with us. All transformation is based on our linguistics, our language, vocabulary. That's why I wanted to call myself out when I said Tier 1 students. If I keep speaking like that, I start to develop a lens to see students through that lens. I don't want to speak like that. I don't want to call somebody by a label. One of the first things I taught in alternative high school, all the kids were in juvenile court. I don't know if Tim got put on probation. I didn't hear all that, so I'm really fascinated with that if he got put on probation. But many of my kids were on probation. I used to tell them, I have a degree in criminology, which I do, from good old Indiana, PA, one of the first schools that gave criminal justice degrees in the 70s. I said, I know the cause of juvenile delinquency. And they'd all like say, what? And I go, will you tell me what it is? Oh, my mom. You know, my drugs, poverty. You're all, that's all part of it. No, there's one simple cause of juvenile delinquency. Anybody know what it is?
Being a juvenile.
That's part of it. You have to be a juvenile. You're on the right track. You're thinking right way. It's getting caught. I said, that's the cause. You got caught and I didn't. Guess what? 90% of people commit a crime. Whether it's stealing, getting drunk before they're 21, smoking a little weed, buying some stolen property, trespassing in a swimming hole, what? It's like, we didn't get caught. Now, there's a whole conversation about privilege. That's another very powerful conversation that we really got to get into another day. But the idea is language is critical. So in this conversation, you know, when I do some work with trainers, we get into small groups. What I just did today, I do not start usually, hopefully I didn't, maybe I did years ago. Too much talk is not good. Connecting before content is what we want to do. This methodology will guarantee these 3 things. You'll connect more before you do your content. You'll slow things down a little bit. We say depth over speed. The value system in a restorative school hopefully will value depth over speed. We'll talk about time later if we have more time. But what do we do? Where do we get the time? Well, you're not getting any more time. It's reconfiguring and recalibrating your decisions about what time you have. Some teachers do a 5-minute check-in before every class, 2-minute check-out before they leave. A weekend pass, you know, a weekend check-out would be helpful to slow things down. When I came back from Bhutan, whoa, man, I really learned in a big way that our culture is addicted to speed. Because there, in that part of the world, they live their life. I think it was the Greeks. They worship at the god of Kronos, Kairos. No, Kronos was the god of like the time. Kairos is like you do things when it's natural to do them. You eat when you're hungry, you sleep when you're tired. You kind of follow your life along the patterns of nature. Our world is like driven more like the time, that thing up there, the clock. And that kind of drives people a little bit batty sometimes because teachers usually say that, man, I am really very efficient. And in a restorative school, we say, let's balance out our efficiency with effectiveness. Now, in the business world, here's how they define those 2 terms. This is how I was taught in HR. An efficient company is doing a lot of things right. Now, there's a difference between doing things right and just doing things too, right? Because sometimes just doing things, well, I'm very busy. People say, I'm busy. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing what I need to do. A lot of school people can relate to this, that you make sure that things are documented. You make sure that your butt is covered, right? Because we know we live in this society where people are going to look over everything. So being efficient is very positive, very helpful. But if I ask people, do you feel very effective? You know, how are you doing with your social capital, with your students? Are you building the relationships you know you need to go and deposit the time so you make a withdrawal when you need it? Are you doing the right things? Well, really, the rub between doing the right things and doing the right things the right way is what we're always after. It's like that's the restorative quadrant in a way, too. So that's what we're after in this kind of conversation. we think this is the right conversations. That's what at least I took from Block's work. After decades, he synthesized it into 6 of them. So we'll practice this one a little bit. Come back to that. So here's the crossroads conversation, or what's called the possibility conversation. Think about this question and just talk a little bit with your partners about what crossroads that you're at this point in your journey. That could be, a journey that you talk about just through life, as parents, as family members, as workers in a system, as teachers. You can take this question wherever you like. But the question is, what crossroads am I at this point in my journey? Through work or by, if I was with a small group, my daughter just got married. So my wife and I are looking at what's next. We're empty nesters, we only had one, but what would be next? So the other suggestion is to let each person have a few minutes talk. I'm not going to interrupt you. I'll give you about 9 minutes. You watch your own time and just kind of notice when there's some pauses, instead of somebody taking the conversation, be mindful, all of you, of keeping track of where your conversation goes. Stay focused on crossroads. And if somebody's off on a tangent somewhere, hopefully that's why we say put you in 3s. The chances of somebody saying, hey, let's get back to the crossroads is double in 3s. If you're just with a pair, and you may not want to talk sometimes, the chances of you going down a rabbit hole are doubled. You're also doubling your chance you're going to like at least one of your partners. So that's a good thing. Because
You don't like?
no, that you will like. If you're with 3, did you ever go into a small group and it's like, this person just is like, oh my God, they're reminding me too much of my sister. And you, what's called capitulate, you kind of put the image on. You never had that happen? Oh, it happens in work all the time. Yalom taught us that we recapitulate our families in all our environment. There's our mother, there's our father.
Did you say Gollum?
Irvin Yalom.
Oh, I just read Gollum from Lord of the Rings. I'm like,
So if somebody's on a tangent, correct them. Don't let this conversation go too far afield. Stay focused. And here's some great follow-up questions. When your partner's done talking, say, hey, could you tell me a little bit more about that crossroads? In other words, be curious. And a great question to evoke curiosity is, tell me a little bit more. That was interesting. Be curious, all right? So answer that whatever way you want. What crossroads am I at this point of my journey? All right, go.
Really looking at the mental health side.
so I hear a lot of yes. We do have to move that.
My friends have children, always thank you. This is master's is in library and information technology. So thankfully, the digital go that route or go work at college.
Maybe it's the long drawn out. Crossroads, yes. They live through from little kids to. That's interesting. When you mentioned that, like you. My and also letting I was not emotional with my husband, and I've always been yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And again, I think it's one of those things that wishes that and change always. But then I said, yeah. And you had two. Yeah. And again, I've always been protected. I think my probably would. Well, I think we're late because I think about my identity as a mom. So I know what involves and not there anymore. Yeah.
Last year at this time I was at like a really big crack. I called everybody
Okay, take 2 more minutes. About 2 more minutes, folks.
Oh, I'm wrong. Honestly, my
My crossroads have two options about one. Now, which is feels nice to be there for now, you know, it's like I don't have my older daughter's 16 and
Okay, so let me gather your attention. We'll try a couple more of these. We got plenty of time. We'll end at 12:30, right? 12:30, we're over? Yep. All right. So if you look up here on the screen, the construction of these questions, by the way, all of my card here, if anybody wants, this is kind of like the Cliff Notes. They still have Cliff Notes? That's what we used to have in the 70s. What are Cliff Notes? Thank you. That's what I used to do in English Lit, just cheat sheets. So this is kind of like the Cliff Notes of the book. This is a free PDF. This is online. I will send this to you because all this idea, this methodology is written in a very wonderful way. All the prompts are in here. He says here that possibilities, which we just did, traditionally we always want to come together and start to do some problem solving. Right? What are the problems? Get our objectives, get a strategic plan. All that has a proper place. But the idea in this work is to just put a pause on that button and let's talk about some possibilities, because we want to postpone problem solving. Let's replace it with possibility. The future that we want to live into is created. This is the doorway to our future. Because in a way, once you articulate and identify a crossroads, you may not take either one of them, but at least it's a point in time when you realize, okay, this is where I'm at. I want to do this. I want to go back to school. I want to stop school. I want to have a baby. I don't want to have any more babies. I want to move. Whatever. There's always crossroads every point in our life, usually, even if they're small ones. Like I said about earlier, what way you want to go to work. Every time that you enter a room, once you declare a possibility, that possibility enters with you. And when it's spoken, it becomes a little more dense. When I was in Bhutan, I knew on some deep level when I came home, even before I found out that I was going to not have a job necessarily and be given some time to recreate myself, that I was not going to go back into the corporate world. I knew that I had to get back right here. And that's with you. I knew I was an educator. I knew I couldn't work again in the alternative school. Little did I know the restorative world was going to evolve the way it did. But I knew the crossroads was severe at 45. My father thought I was crazy. What are you doing? You got a 6-year-old. You're going to start a nonprofit. Doing what? Just what? Like, my father worked for one company for 30 years. His world was gone, right? So the idea about crossroads is so helpful. And there's other questions like, what possibility enters with you every time you enter a room? When you do this work with Peter, if you go to the Cincinnati Day-Longs, they cost $35. You know, he doesn't need the money anymore. He's selling his books. He has residual income. But at 80, he's still giving his gift to the world. So we sit down for a whole day. We have potluck lunch. People come from all over, a lot of Cincinnatians. But we just practice this methodology. And he says at the end of our work together, he said, now stand up. Each person gets a chance to tell the whole room and declare the possibility that is alive in them at that point. And once you speak it in a public place, it becomes a little bit easier for you to follow that, dream that you might have that might otherwise have been unspoken. What possibility has the power to transform the whole world you live in, the world, the community, what inspires you? What can we create together that we can't create alone? And at the end of each time we take into small groups, he says the best method is to just stand up and have a few people just report out not what they just talked about. That's the worst thing to do. And if you're ever a trainer or facilitator, don't have people report out anymore in a large group. Not what they just did, because too often, how many times have you been in a room, the report outs start to happen? What starts to happen to you when the report outs go on? Anybody? You get 10 small groups, people get up with their sheet of paper and they're telling everybody what they just did. What starts to happen?
Yeah, we already said that.
Thank you. I'll make another I statement. I just start to zone out because I already had the conversation. That's the same thing. And even facilitators, they just add something different. Here's a better question. Ask somebody to stand up and tell the group what struck them in the conversation. It could be something about themselves, but the language is important. So you say, what struck you? It invites lightning into the room. The question is good. The question, what resonated with you? Now, we encourage people not to share what somebody else said unless you kind of, have their permission, because they didn't say that to the whole room. But let's just practice this. So who would like to just stand up, tell us your name, and what struck you in the conversation? And standing up, stand up, thank you. So the reason you have somebody stand up is help equalize the power a little bit. Now we're into this facilitative mode. You have the floor, and having somebody stand up is helpful to tell the whole group your name and what struck you.
I'm Sean Marie, and we're all at very different parenting stages, but we all have struggles within this parenting phases.
Okay.
We're all at crossroads in our personal lives with our kids.
All right. And where are you from? What part of the state?
Twin Valley, so southern Berks County.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Somebody else. What struck you? Thank you. Tell us your name.
My name's Leanne.
Leanne?
And what struck me was the importance of thinking about like the whole person, not just academics, but also mental health or like our passions around music or our jobs. Like those were just some themes that came up.
All right. Thank you. How about one more? Thank you. What's your name?
Karen Johnston. What struck me, and what just struck me as you were asking that question was, and only one person mentioned this word, but I felt it with most of us, was how exhausting crossroads can be even for possibility.
Yes. Because why? What makes them exhausting?
For us, as we were talking, I think overthinking.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're overthinking the crossroads.
Okay.
It's exhausting.
Yep.
There's other reasons, but I think in context.
You kind of weigh, you make little T-charts in your head, the pros and the cons, and if I do this, I do that, I don't do this, I get that. It takes some work. To really live and examine life takes some courage and takes some energy. Because some people just kind of go through life and don't, everything's on the surface and they seem like nothing bothers them. But their life is maybe not as rich or deep as another's. So living more deeply, living more richly is exhausting sometimes because it takes psychic energy, takes some work. Peter says that every powerful question has these 4 attributes. They make you think. They are ambiguous. They crossroads. What crossroads am I at? I don't know. No, nothing big. Doesn't matter. Don't judge it. Big, small, big, important. It's a crossroads. They a little bit anxiety producing. They're personal. So weren't you somewhat curious about people in a different way? Because there is some level of vulnerability in this question too, and exposure. To me, I say people would choose whatever they're interested in sharing or comfortable sharing. There's no coercion. It's a very fascinating method to get people connected. Because another question a facilitator might ask is, how many can relate to any of the 3 things that the 3 women shared? Raise your hand if you can relate to different stages of parenting, any of the comments. Most people, so that gets people connected, just asking other people what they relate to. This method actually is all exhausting too because it confronts each individual with their own personal freedom. That's what's also takes some work. It confronts people with their own freedom, that they don't have to do anything other than what they choose to do. And yes, there's some major costs for going out and finding new work in midlife that I had to pay in my anxiety, even though I had some severance pay. It wasn't financial pressure. It was just an existential, like, what am I going to do? Well, I just kind of started writing stuff down because I kind of put everything I knew into practice. You want to have a new vision in life? Start writing, journaling, getting it out of your mind, writing it down. And I had a quote on my wall that I kind of put in a frame finally. I think it was the German philosopher Goethe. I don't have it all memorized. It was something like, as long as there's hesitancy, until one commits, there's always hesitancy. And when one commits, providence moves to. And all kinds of things come to one's aid, both financial and human resources that you might not otherwise even know exists. It takes all acts of initiative and commitment, whether it's small or large. But once commitment happens, I believe this is how I live my life, there's unseen force. I don't know. It's just I believe that happens at times. That once I commit, all other things. So it's like what we learned in Counseling 101. You want somebody else to change, you want your mate to change, your kids to change, your clients to change, you got to change. You know, if you need to terminate the relationship with your therapist, it's like I'm just feeding into their dependence. It's not working, so I'm going to have to make this decision as a clinician. You want to change a relationship, sometimes it's hard to leave them, but you know that it's the most healthy thing to do. All right, another round. So the next question will go into what's called the ownership. Now you're getting a kind of a blitzkrieg exposure to this. We're not going through all 6, but this one's called the ownership conversation. Ownership, this one's important. It says this is the decision to become truly the author of your own experience. It's realizing that you are the cause of things that happen in your life. People sometimes live their life through the lens of a victim, or they're always experiencing the effect of somebody else's behavior, but you are the cause rather than the effect. It's the choice to decide on your own what you value and what meaning will occur when you show up. It's the stance that you are collectively creating the very world that you're living into. And this distinction is important, to make a distinction between ownership and blame. Because all blaming does is just give you a sense of entitlement. What I love about this quote is I heard somebody came up with this in a circle I was in. They said, all complaining, all that is an advertisement for helplessness. Complaining is an advertisement for helplessness. I love that quote. Because you realize that, yeah, I mean, I can listen to a complaint, but at the end of the day, I'm done hearing somebody else's complaint. I want to hear what you're doing about it, or what your dilemma is about doing what your cost is going to be. All right, so here's the question. Think about the thing that you complain about, or a thing you complain about. Think about the big thing you complain about. Go with your partners wherever you want in terms of sharing. If you're married, just there'll be no problem, all right? You will have something immediately, or in a long-term relationship, you'll have some complaint that should come up. So think about what you complain about the most. And then here's the question. How do you contribute to the very thing that you complain about? What is your contribution to that thing that you complain about? All right, that should be a little anxiety-provoking, a little personal, a little make you think. What do you contribute to the thing that you complain about? All right? I complain about my weight, right? And then I eat 2 pieces of cake. I didn't eat 2 last night. 1 would have been fine, or none would have been better, right? So I complain about that, and I do it to myself. All right. What do you contribute to the thing you complain about the most?
Morality stuff is they don't want to be told like not to do, like chastity and stuff like that. So anyway, they like arguments when I vent to other people about that, I think maybe I'm not thinking of they come to my lessons different ways of trying to reach them, but I still think teachers can more effort.
Totally true. Totally
It's my first year teaching the subject, so
but then again,
maybe there's a different
Maybe I'm hearing correctly. Like, not necessarily that subject. It's just, you know, it's a topic that is doing a really good job. So maybe you guys do something that was
There's
you know, again, not focusing on walk away. Just feel like yeah, I'm gonna go home and have my weekend and I'm not gonna like it'll all be okay. So I'll just do but I'm just too tired to have this, like, I just don't feel like doing this right now. Yeah. Yeah, right. But maybe you're right, you do in a different conversation. Or rather than like, my kid always
Okay, 2 more minutes. I know this is a short time, but I want to get one more in. 2 more minutes.
But then it's not presented, there's staff in a way. Because people say it's bad because we're even though I've seen good results with it. It's hard because so it's somebody who does not require that competency or leadership, you know, like, and that would probably get like you set it up multiple times or at each other, even though we're at each other.
They'll do anything. Well, you're placing, you don't, rather than be.
Okay, so let me gather your attention, and we'll do one more round. We'll do what's called the gift conversation because every time you have a small group, it's best to put a little bow on each kind of experience you have, because it's probably likely that you may never be in a triad with these people again in your entire life. It may be likely, most probably. But there's something to remember, this talk conversation, that's going to be a gift. But before we do gifts, let me just ask a couple people, again, what struck you in this conversation? Anyone? Yes, please stand up. Tell us your name, where you're from.
My name's Courtney. I'm from Franklin County.
Okay.
And one thing that we talked about is how these questions ask us to be vulnerable, and the work that we're doing, and sometimes that being vulnerable is uncomfortable, but the work that we're doing in the SAP program is asking kids every day to be vulnerable. So it's like balancing, why are we okay being vulnerable when we're expecting the kids to be vulnerable?
Yeah. How many people can relate to that one? Thank you. All right, and one more. Who wants to speak? What struck you in this conversation? Well, that's a bad question. Who wants to speak? That's the bad question. I'll call myself out on that one. Who is going to speak next? Thank you. Stand up. Tell us your name, where you're from.
Logan from Allentown, Pennsylvania, School District. We all shared from different populations and different areas, even nonprofit and school, but we take on way too much and have a very difficult time saying no and setting those limits for ourselves. And then, unfortunately, sometimes the emotional state that you're in, even though wonderful things are happening, you begrudge, you resent, some resentment, and then you're in it, you've planned it, you've put something wonderful together for your colleagues, for your school, for your kids, and you're not able to enjoy it the same way as if you had set your own limits and been comfortable with delegating.
Okay. So just stay standing. I'm just going to give you one more shot because you're an advanced student. If you had to reframe what you just said in a simple I statement, how would you make that into an I statement? Not using a pronoun of we or you or a plural pronoun, how would you state what you just said in an I statement?
That I need to learn to say no more and,
Okay.
know what my limits are.
Thank you. So just reframing something sometimes, so listen carefully. That's why I love being really focused on language and as a behaviorist, I listen closely to language. And if you ask somebody to reframe something in the first person singular pronoun like I, you're going to have a different awareness of what you just said. Yes? No? Yeah, definitely, because sometimes when I speak in the you or the we, it's a distancing to myself from owning something. So in the ownership conversation, it's when we best say I statements are helpful. I agree completely that we need to take, I still work on taking my own medicine. When I was trained as a counselor, they put us, I was in a small nonprofit social service out of school, but being clinically supervised by somebody to be asking you questions, what's going on with you as a counselor and a therapist, critical. And all the shamans in the world, the people that are in medicine, natural healers, they've taken all their restoratives. They know what helps. So you got to take your own medicine if you're going to dispense with it too, right? All right. Yes.
That was, in the I or in the we and us was even a protective barrier, because to know we're all very aware in our conversations of how it's affecting, how bringing on too much is affecting us, even just day-to-day emotional states. And so being able to speak as a we allowed me to kind of distance from the fact of the matter is I know that it's not healthy of how much I do take on.
Yes.
And I think so. It was just interesting in that same we was able to be like, okay, I'm in this together. But the fact of the matter is, it's all of us.
Yeah, and the good thing is, thank you for sharing that. Really, thank you for sharing from your heart, because in a way, this is what this work is about to me. It's like getting into that heart space, and this method, when I think that you really it's like riding a bike, you keep riding it, and the other questions, read the book and practice it with people you really trust, or not trust, just do it, and you get some kind of awareness from it. So what Peter says, I asked him to come to our conference in Bethlehem. The Institute has a world conference every year, and he doesn't want to travel as much. He's done traveling, but I'm persistent. I kept after him, please come. This whole field of restorative educators. He goes, well, my daughter lives in Philly. I said, I'll be your bag man. I'll pick you up at Philly. I will pick you up. You will not take a bag. I'll carry your bag. I'll drive you to your daughter's. And he came. And you know what he told us about, a few hundred people? He goes, he was so happy to be with us because he didn't know much about education and the restorative, some of the business world. But he said, the good thing is that you're not alone. When you enter into this world of taking your own medicine, you find out you're not alone. Vulnerability, as Brene Brown taught us in her TED Talk, is the most powerful thing you can get into, because you realize you can unburden yourself by sharing some of your pain and frustration. And it's refreshing. It's like freeing yourself up. So you're not crazy. None of you are not crazy. That's why these conferences are great. Getting in your own support groups can help you go the long distance. You're not alone. You're not crazy. All right, last round, the gift conversation. So this one is like really, literally about a minute. Just turn to each person individually and say, Devin, the gift that I got from you is blank. And you share the gift that you saw in Devin in just a few minutes, or the gift you received from the person, and say their name and talk to them directly. It could just be, courage to be vulnerable, or sharing of something that was really, same as me, or your smile, or your focus with me, or whatever. Just a quick ending capstone, a gift that you got from each of the individuals, and each of you do one at a time, all right? Takes about a minute. Keep it quick, keep it simple. What gift did you see in that person? What gift did you get from them? You might have to go even faster because you got 4. All right.
Wow, the gift I got from you was around your passion for music and your
I go by Katie.
Okay, one more minute. One more minute. I know it was quick. Okay, I'm going to try to, I know I'm going to probably go over just a minute or two, so just hang with me. I apologize. I really try to work on being punctual, but I just want to finish this. If you want these slides, I can get the slides to you. You can pick up a card at the end of my talk. I'll mail you the slides, or I think they're going to put on the internet. Dissent conversation, all this stuff I can send you the PDF. What have you said yes to that you no longer mean? What no are you postponing? The ability to have dissent. If you have a school where you have open, welcome dissent, it'll stay healthier. The schools that are most toxic are where dissent is squashed, repressed, suppressed. And you know what happens then? Everybody goes outside the meeting and has the real meeting. Did you ever go to those meetings? That's what we're trying to stop. The meeting in the parking lot, we want the meeting in this room. And you have to invite the dissent in a healthy way. And those questions can be really helpful. So some of the people that are really practicing this method is like they're taking their own medicine, and leaders, principals are saying, I'm going to use this to get my faculty even more honest with each other. So yes.
And these questions, they're intended to be asked in a continuum.
There is some logic in the linear fashion with them, but sometimes you got to be careful. I wouldn't start usually with that one, right? Starting like with the possibility, why is it important you're in the room? When I do a training, I never ask people to just start with saying your name, rank, and serial number, what you do. People don't listen to that. Put them in small groups. The fastest way to connect a large group is to break them into triads. And if you're leading a big group and you kind of see people fading, looking at their phone, or whatever, watch, break them into small groups, get them immediately into a small conversation. All right, so to finish up, there is some logic in the order, absolutely. So it doesn't always have to go one after another. Commitment certainly can be really helpful in the beginning. Like what promise? I sometimes ask people, do you promise to be here for the whole time? And if you can't, tell me, because I don't want people to just sneak out of the room. It's fine if people have commitments. They have to, we call them competing commitments. I can't be here for the whole training. Fine, but don't just sneak out of the room. Let us know before you leave what you took from the day. What gift did you get from the day? All right, so I'll send you all these questions. They're great questions. Some I came up with, some are in the book. The book is there to read. I want to finish real quick. Similar stories to Tim's too. I have the same story. You have the same story. There's somebody probably, besides your mom and dad or grandma, whoever you lived with, whoever gave you food, shelter, clothing, there's probably another adult that made a huge difference in your life. Where I was that night too, I like to end with this, like where I was also, why did I want to go to the moon? I wanted to get out of my crazy house for that summer. And I didn't want to go to Vietnam either. But I was also a bit of I was in a rumble that probably day when I got my picture taken in high school. I had a black eye. I was most nervous when I went back to my high school to give a talk. And what I did one night is I scrapped all my preparation. I got the yearbook out and scanned all these amazing people in my life. I definitely was looking for more of a father. In the 50s and 60s, men were working. Usually mothers were home with all the babies. I wanted more of a male companion. I wanted a male mentor. So I have these male teachers, and each of them has a story. The stories aren't important as much as the fact is that they knew that that relationship, what Tim talked about with his mentor too, that's what this is about. And that doesn't mean you're not saving people, but every now and then you'll see one that you just kind of take a little pause and say, let me talk to you. I want to talk to you. I want to really give you kind of what my friends in the Deep South would say, a come to Jesus moment. I don't mean it religiously, but it's a vernacular. I want to talk right from my heart and tell you what I see, what I hear. And each of those gentlemen and the lady, my favorite teacher, Miss Bradley, French teacher. Interestingly enough, now I'm a father-in-law of a Frenchman. I don't speak a lick of French. I just was terrible at French.
Tell Mrs. Bradley that. I know, right?
I did tell her. You know what she told me, the lesson, Miss Bradley? She goes, you really deserve an F. You failed every test. But I'm giving you a Mercy D. And the Mercy D was a D minus, mine, whatever. She goes, you never cut my class, you never copped an attitude. It was who you were. You were a joy to teach, even though you failed every class. Because